Our topic today is creating with AI we can trust. And I want to start, Jim, with a question for you. So there was an article in the New York Times Magazine this last week that was written by an author who was lamenting our current era as, quote, the least innovative century for arts in 500 years. I don't know if others here have read this. But the author basically noted that, quote, a work of art demonstrates its value through its freshness, and asserted that the freshness piece is languishing here. So enter AI and LLMs in particular. We have an opportunity with AI to democratize creativity, giving people access to tools to create more. What do you think, Jim? Whether you agree with his assessment or not, do you believe that AI has the potential to amplify creativity, to sort of reinsert this freshness that we perhaps have been losing?
Just a full heads up to everybody here, I totally expect Prabha to torture me while I'm up here. That question is a super hard one, like it gets into what's the nature of creativity. I'm kind of skeptical. There's lots of instances throughout history where people bemoan the lack of creativity. I guess it gets down to what you think of as creativity. There's a direct access kind of creativity. You think about painting or other kinds of arts, someone's actually performing. And I would say no amount of AI, if you want to learn to play the trombone, reading all the books about how to play a trombone is not going to help you play the trombone. So there's a performance aspect that you can't just assume with language. Other cases, though, there's maybe more of an indirect relationship there. So if you think about what we do as designers, I would say many of the designers who are in the software field, and I see some people out here who I know who are doing that design work, I would think of it as a kind of a translation. You would have an intention, and you would try to write these specs, which would then later get translated or retranscribed to become code to be performed, right? So there's a distance there. That kind of creativity, I think, there are places where being able to iterate more quickly on that can really help. But you still have to ask the question at the end, who's deciding it's good? How do you know it's good? And I think that's a fundamental question, and I think that's something that human and intuition, we often would say at Apple, it's like, do you have taste? Like, well, how do you get taste? That is something that's a little more elusive from what I think AI does today.
And do you envision a world where we can code goodness into, or a judge of goodness into the AI, where it becomes the arbiter of good for us?
Yeah, I think
tell it to
the extent that there's a lot of aspects of design which are about recognizing patterns and reinstituting patterns, and of course, part of the challenge there is as you scale, even at a place like Apple, there's so many different OSs and so many patterns, it becomes a challenge to make sure that something that's innovative also works with stuff you've done before. So those kinds of things, I think it can be very helpful. Breakthrough, though, we had this discussion earlier. Imagine you wanted to write sonnets like E.E. Cummings, but the LLM had never trained because this person had never existed, so that writing had never been trained. Would something novel like that come out? I think maybe if you're tweaking and getting different variations, but that breakthrough thing, I think, still requires this other kind of struggle, and I still believe that's where we are here for humans, and that part of design is where we're going to fit this to humanity. That's still important.
And Sanmi, similar question for you. Knowing how these models are built, better than just about anyone else in the world, what do you think with respect to sort of freshness and creativity and the new content that we can potentially create? Do you believe that it has the potential to amplify our creativity, or do you perhaps believe, because of the nature in which these models are trained on existing art, on existing narrative art, visual art, is AI more likely to eliminate or minimize our creativity even?
Yeah, so thanks for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. I have a dead battery. Okay, I'll borrow this for now. Thank you. So, excellent question. I think nice, challenging one, as Jim mentioned earlier. I'll say, in many areas where creativity sort of expresses itself, I think some of the greatest successes seem to be where people are sort of level-headed about what the tools are good at and how they can use them. I've heard it expressed, and I think this is true, at least current tools you should use when sort of the cost of doing something from scratch yourself is less than, you have some expertise in the area, so you can check whether something is actually sort of meaningfully done correctly or not, and sort of the cost of generating something and checking that it actually matches what you want is less than the cost it would have been to do something from scratch yourself. And I think this is meaningful because I think while these tools have lots of incredible capabilities, have gotten a lot better, and can be an accelerator for building for creative work and things like that. It matters, I think, still that for things that are at the cutting edge of new creativity, like what Jim is talking about, both that there's a human somewhere in the loop that can sort of help evaluate whether things are happening meaningfully. I think to your specific question, the ways that we know how to program creativity right now are somewhat limited. I think there's still compositions of existing things. I think it's reasonable to say, part of what AI does, and I find this regularly in lots of areas, so we'll talk about creativity, we'll talk a bit about education, I think this will come up. I find this in many areas, healthcare, for instance, where AI tools are used. Some of what it does is also it forces us to reflect on ourselves and sort of understand humans better. And so, it forces us to question, what is creativity in humans? And is it just combining things together in sort of new ways? And perhaps some would argue part of creativity possibly is that. And I think for those kinds of creativity, arguably, modern AI tools can be quite good at that. But I agree with Jim's sort of argument that there are aspects of creativity that are beyond simple combinations, or complex combinations maybe, but combinations. And there, I think, the tools have a ways to go. Is there a possibility that the tools will eventually get so good that Jim's question or Jim's answer will no longer be true? I don't know, but it doesn't seem like there's an obvious path to that right now.
So then, what are you seeing, Sanmi, amongst your students? How are you seeing your students? How are you seeing your fellow researchers, educators creating with AI? How have your own teaching methods evolved as a result of AI's emergence?
Yeah, thanks for a great question. I think while it is true, you mentioned, I build these tools, so I know some about how things are built. So ChatGPT was announced. I helped run the NeurIPS conference last year. This is the big AI conference in New Orleans. And ChatGPT was sort of rumored around then and sort of announced soon after. And despite this being the crux of technology being built that sort of is behind lots of what we're seeing, I think the field itself was surprised at sort of how far the tools had gone via scaling and sort of many other mechanical aspects of what I think great engineering OpenAI had done to actually get these tools to become meaningfully better than what we expected based on what the research was at the time. And some of what this has done, I think, is, to my reflection theme, caused this consternation within education. So as many of you know, and any of you, I saw some young people around, younger than me, so students, or if you have kids, the way that people engage with education, I think, has changed meaningfully. And this is something that academics, particularly people who are teaching, are having a lot of trouble sort of fully grappling with. And what I mean specifically is, if you're assigning work that can get a rote response. So some simple things like question answering, but even quite complex things. So we had a retreat recently where people looked up our intro programming class. And so there's a homework assignment, you get a coding example, it gives you a template, it says here's the description of this piece of code, and your job is to fill in the rest of the code. Well, if you ask this into ChatGPT, it will actually fill in the rest of the code for you quite accurately. And so if your goal as a student is to get perfect grades in this homework, you can do that without having learned many of this. And this, I'm saying this in coding, but a lot of this happens in, say, we often ask students to summarize papers as a sort of get a sense of how they're thinking about things. And so this forces us to think, what is the education for, and what are we actually teaching? because if the whole goal is just completing the task, then arguably there are now tools that can complete that task. And I think where I think the field is landing is a lot of what we're doing is critical thinking and sort of teaching how to think critically about sort of meaningful aspects of how to both build technology but also engage with technology. I like to use the analogy to, we still teach how to add numbers together, but we haven't had to add numbers for many, many years, the calculators. And if you want a really expensive calculator, you can use ChatGPT for your calculator as well. But we don't really need to know how to add ourselves, but it's meaningful, we think, as educators, that sort of the critical thinking skills, the logic thinking skills, the sort of knowledge of how to process information that comes from this process of learning what arithmetic means, is valuable for building a good society, valuable for building critical thinking people that can engage meaningfully. It's also meaningful to say technology will change. I mean, we're excited now, but things change all the time, and they will definitely change soon, and depending on who you talk to, sooner or later. And so our job is not only to train for whatever is popular now, our job is to train for sort of, again, engaging meaningfully with technology in the long term and teaching people how to think and engage with technology. And so this is a lot of how we think about it. But I would say for sure, there are murmurs of thinking about what education is. I don't think they've been as loud as they've been over the past 6 months to a year when some of the easy ways of thinking about education, I think, changed.
Great, thank you. One more quick question around sort of the creation aspect before bridging over to trust. For you, Jim, how about for designers? ChatGPT can crank out a lot of written content. As a writer, should I be nervous? Is this eliminating the role of the writer? Is it arming us with more or fewer creative ideas? Is it changing the nature of creativity in the medium itself? How are you seeing it sort of play out in the design space for creatives?
Yeah, sure, great question. I mean, I do think we forget that a lot of things that designers do are technology-based already. If you think back to Susan Kare doing the original Mac, she was designing black and white icons. And eventually there was a tool, Studio 8, that added 8 bits. Oh, wow. And of course, no one's designing like that today. But those tools change through time. There's a lot of process knowledge that goes into it. And if you identify design as the process knowledge, that is something I think that can get automated. Nobody really wants. Now, the question I would have back for you would be, is there a point where you stop knowing the tool to know how to shape the outcome? So the example that Terry Winograd gave was Michelangelo. We consider him the greatest sculptor perhaps in history. He eventually had a studio where he was directing other people to do work for him. At what point does he not do sculpture enough? Or if he never did sculpture, would he know what to do? So I think right now, like a lot of discussions we have is it great writing? There may be many things for which it suffices for the job you needed to do, but if you're like Apple and you want to do like the best quality stuff, we're focusing a lot on the object. There's a social practice. Johnny Ive has a great interview, which I recommend anybody see from 2014, where he talks about the process, and he says, the exciting part is one day there's no idea. The next day somebody makes something and comes in, and it's an idea that sparks a conversation. And there's a social practice around that design that refines it and takes it forward. So that's the piece, like making the artifact that you can then have a conversation around, that may be helpful. But I think having talented designers that can critique and take it forward, that's still something that's not replicable.
Right. Well, whether or not AI will be a job killer for me or anyone else in this room, I guess we know for sure at least that AI is going to play an increasing role in how we create and what we create. And we'll need models that we can trust to support this creativity. So question for you, Sanmi. First, I want to sort of lay out some context. Research out of Stanford shows that we can only distinguish between human and AI text with about 50% accuracy. That's about the same random chance as a coin flip. And over a third of people say they'll use AI to create content for their dating profiles. Over half of folks trust it for financial planning, for medical diagnosis, not just medical advice, medical diagnosis, and life and relationship advice. How do those numbers make you feel? How trustworthy are LLMs? And do you worry that people are using them or misusing them in areas that are this intimate?
Yeah, it's another hard question, but meaningful one. So I think indeed something does feel meaningfully different about how society is engaging with AI now compared to sort of previous iterations of this kind of technology. And a lot of it, again, I think is, this language interface just makes it just feel very different. And because of this, I think, on its face, people are just much more willing to treat language models as sort of trusted source of knowledge and other generative AI tools. And I think, the danger there, and a lot of what the research committee has been trying to do is, again, better understand what the limits of this trust might meaningfully be. So there are lots of dimensions in which I think this question is important. Some of it you're alluding to in terms of detection of source of information and what this means about creative work. Some of this meaningful for thinking about hallucinations and mistakes that models make and how maybe it reveals something about our willingness to accept these mistakes sometimes as truth. There are all these stories of...
If we can identify them, right?
It's quite hard to tell, for sure.
Yeah.
There are questions on privacy, there are questions on security that we've done research to try to better understand. I think there are hard questions on what it means in society. So the biggest and most important, the headline of machine learning in the world is that machine learning is trains from data. Data comes from us, from society. Everything that's good and bad about us will show up in the machine learning tools. And some of the way that this meaningfully exhibits includes, for instance, a lot of the societal biases show up in the model. So there's work published today talking about AI tools used in healthcare and how they will sometimes make sort of race-based predictions that are tied to maybe how medicine thought about things a decade ago. Medicine has evolved and is thinking about mistakes in the knowledge and improving, but the tools are based on existing data and have not updated to society's evolution. And sometimes this can actually pull us back in sort of difficult ways. So clearly, we've come a long way. I think there's a lot still to be done. And a lot of my work and a lot of work in the field is, again, thinking about what the limits of the technology are and thinking about ways to improve the gaps as we see them.
Great, and we've got just another minute left, so I want to close with a question that's coming from Slide, or at least a version of the question. How can we make AI models more trustworthy, and what experiences have you come across that are eroding trust among users? So what's eroding trust, and how do we build back that trust? And we can start with you, Jim.
I'll keep this brief. I think skepticism is the way to go. Treat it like an assistant that may or may not know what to do, but brings you something when you're evaluating it. I think that's super important. Evolutionarily, language developed to be cooperative. That was a huge advantage to us. And there's two rules we use to decide whether it's working. Are you providing for the group, and can I trust that you're not going to prey on the group? We make those decisions based on social cues. The fact that these things are not grounded in my reality, the overall reality, but are synthesizing it, makes the ability to impute trust very difficult, I think. Doesn't mean the answers aren't right, but I think you need to start out with it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 1 minute. So I've talked a bit about a few dimensions that we're thinking about sort of improving trust more generally. I'll say maybe for this room, because there are a lot of builders here who are building technology, I might argue that one way that you can erode trust is overpromising and under-delivering. I think that's very easy to do when we're excited about technology, we're excited about what it can bring. And so you tell your potential customers this, and again, you don't match what you think you can actually do. So I think having a better understanding and sort of better evaluating what our models can actually do, with the goal of making them better, but again, being clear to users about where we are in building technology, I think is a meaningful way. Among many other ways that we can improve the trust in AI tools.
Great. Well, Stanford published its Foundation Model Transparency Index just this week, so good time.
Very recently.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, great. Thank you all for being here.
Have an answer. Sanmi, Jim, and Prabha, thank you so much.